She had a medical appointment that day, and he was the one to take her. At the time, nothing seemed to be wrong. She just had a bit of a head cold, but that was it. When he dropped her off, he told her he'd be back to pick her up after her appointment, 1 hour later. The hours flew by as he sat there, waiting for his wife to come out, but she never arrived. Now, 42 years later, the old cold case is closed but nowhere near being solved. What could a simple word and a photograph have to do with it? Flora Stevens was last seen by her husband on the night of August 3, 1975. She was a 36-year-old woman full of life and adventure who worked at a resort in the Catskill Mountains. That night, she was feeling under the weather due to the flu. Her husband drove her to a doctor's appointment in Monticello, New York, but when he went to pick her up, she was nowhere to be found. The whereabouts of Flora were utterly unknown. The case was opened and was in full force, with detectives searching for her and her bizarre disappearance. But the case eventually went cold as they could not for the life of them figure out what happened to Flora. They would have never guessed the case would be reopened almost half a decade later. In 2017, Leanne Solomon, a senior investigator with the New York State Police, had just stumbled upon something that might just give him answers to a case he did not know existed. The skeletal remains of a woman had been found, and he was in desperate need of identifying the body. His next move had him scrambling for his phone. Solomon called the sheriff's office in Sullivan County. He needed to talk to a detective. The woman they had found the remains of had been buried near the Catskills, and they had to discover who this woman was. But nearly 70,000 women over the age of 18 go missing in the United States each year. It was going to be an impossible task to identify this woman until they had a brilliant idea. By January 2016, there were still 21,894 active cases of missing women throughout the U.S. files that went cold and were put in storage but remained very much alive. Solomon knew he had a tough task ahead. His team and himself would have to go through the thousands of open cases and find similarities to the body they had found. This created a series of possible identities for the woman, until one stood out. It was a long shot, but Salmon headed to Sullivan County and began his research. He decided to simplify the investigation a little and went on to do local searches that could pinpoint the identity of the woman. With his various skills, he learned that the woman they had found must have been from the area and began, one by one, searching for answers. Sullivan County had an open case from years ago that roughly matched the description. Could that be it? Would the case be closed? Solomon asked the investigators to see this woman's case file, to see if the missing woman had any living relatives. The missing woman's file was old. It dated from 1975 and the information provided on it was null. But something did click. Solomon passed the case over to the detectives in Sullivan County. Detective Rich Morgan was assigned to it, and his main task was to connect the dots between these two women. The missing woman's work ID was found, and she had worked in the Catskill Mountains, where the corpse of the matter of fact, it's a pretty common type of occurrence among Alzheimer's disease patients. Here's how Beth Colmier, Vice President of Constituent Services at the Alzheimer's Association, explains it. One of the things we talk about for late-stage care is to find alternative ways to connect with them, says Colmier. They're still alive, they're still living here, so that helps make their quality of life better when you can find ways to connect with them. One way to do that is to look through old photos or to tell them about old memories or past events. However, there seems to be no way of knowing what really happened to her during all those years, due to Flora's inability to communicate. We really don't know the circumstances of why or how she disappeared, Detective Morgan said. But they did have more clues about what could have happened. Flora's caregiver, Muva, got bits of her background. She says Flora told him she came from a bad marriage, and that her husband had been abusive, that she had grown up in Yonkers, and that the main thing that characterizes Flora is this one phrase, "None of your business." But that's not all. Muva has her own theory about what might have happened to Flora. To be honest, I don't think she ever really wanted to be found. You can tell something happened in her past that she didn't want any part of. Let's not forget that Mbuva has extensive experience working with people with Alzheimer's disease. She knows how this type of patient behaves and how to read them. But what was Flora hiding? What exactly was she escaping from? We may never know for sure. Sullivan County has officially closed the case. They confirmed Flora Harris was indeed Flora Stevens. It is not too often that you get to solve a 42-year-old missing person case, Sheriff Mike Schiff said in a press release. In order to protect the privacy of those depicted, some names, locations, and identifying characteristics have been changed and are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblances to actual events or places or persons, living or dead, are entirely coincidental.